Intentional. A fired-up lawmaker attacking the Defense Department for the decision to withhold benefits for grieving families of fallen troops.
You chose to do an interpretation to just maximize pain.
Congressman Duncan Hunter on what he is learning about the decision some now claim was no accident.
Also breaking tonight on the Kelly File, the White House reverses itself as the president's approval rating plummets. Just hours after insisting that White House action was unnecessary to reinstate the death benefits to grieving military families, President Obama signs a bill doing exactly that. This is lawmakers who say they did protect these death benefits prior to the government shutdown, angrily pressed a Pentagon official today for answers on why those benefits were not provided.
It is an absolute embarrassment. We are failing in our duties to those who take care of us and protect us every day.
I believe the guidance issued by Comptroller Hale was based on a deliberate decision by the Department of Defense to misinterpret the Pay Our Military Act for political purposes.
I just find it outrageous.
Yes, you could have paid the death benefit, and yet you chose to do an interpretation to just maximize pain. You've compounded the problem by your conduct in how you've misinterpreted intentionally this law. I think it's just such an embarrassment to this country.
I would like a chance to respond. I resent your remarks, yes. And let the record show that.
Duncan Hunter is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and is an Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran. The mother of one of the soldiers killed in Afghanistan over the weekend, who found herself without the benefit, lives in his district. Representative Hunter, good to see you again tonight. And so first, let me ask you whether you agree that there is some evidence that the withholding of these benefits may have been intentional by the Pentagon, by those advising the Pentagon, which we now know included Eric Holder's DOJ, and that the White House Office of Management and Budget was also informed days ago, before this came out to the rest of the world, that this was going to be a problem, and as far as we know, did not solve it.
Hey, Megan, it was definitely intentional. At some point in the Department of Defense, somebody looked somebody else in the eye and said, do not give these families the death benefit. Even though I just found out today that the most likely legal interpretation of what we did does pay these death benefits, sure, there might have been some ambiguity, and the lawyers could argue over it, but Chuck Hagel, the Secretary of Defense, or the President of the United States, need to have the moral fortitude to say, pay these guys. Do it. I don't care if it's ambiguous. Let's ask for forgiveness later, pay them.
Because who would have challenged it? Who would have challenged it? If they had
Nobody would have challenged it.
Because just so our viewers know what happened, we were headed toward the shutdown, and the members of Congress foresaw that there might be an issue with paying our military, so they passed the Pay Our Military Act, and that act specifically said, let's pay. It authorizes sums necessary to provide pay and allowances. Well, the Department of Defense has a list of what's included in pay and allowances, and specifically on there is death benefits. So there was a good faith belief that the death gratuity, as it's called, would be covered by the act you guys passed on the eve of the shutdown. Once DOD conferred with DOJ, the Department of Justice sits down with the Department of Defense and says, nope, not covered. Did anybody call you? Did anybody contact Congress and say, you weren't explicit enough, there was a loophole, and our veterans are about to get the short end? What are we going to do about it?
No, nobody contacted us, because I think now that they wanted to do this on purpose. And because we have civilian control of the military, the Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel, should have said, get this done. We're not going to stand for it. I think Chuck Hagel needs to think about offering his resignation over this, because he's the one who's at the top of this food chain and broke the sacred trust with these families. These military families are not pawns to be played with by this administration to make political points, and that's exactly what happened in this situation. Chuck Hagel needs to take a look in the mirror and say, did I do my job as the Secretary of Defense and as the guardian of that trust with these military families and the American people, that I do my job? And I would look him in the eye and said, sir, you did not do your job. You did not do what you were supposed to do as the Secretary of Defense. And Mr. President, the President of the United States, again, could have fixed this with a pen stroke about 9 days ago. Whenever they first found out about it, he didn't do it either. He used our military families as pawns. And again, it's embarrassing and despicable of our civilian leaders of the military to do this.
Well,
no wonder the military doesn't trust our civilian leadership.
What happened after this came out was Ken Fisher of the Fisher House steps in and says, look, I'm going to step in and I'm going to help these families until Congress and the White House, everybody can get their act together. And so you guys in the House of Representatives say, look, with all due respect, let's try to fix it the right way. You pass a bill unanimously saying, let's authorize these funds. The Senate,
Again.
Harry Reid says that's a gimmick. That's for show. We don't need to act on that in the Senate. The White House says the same thing. And then both of them, Harry Reid and the White House, reversed themselves within hours. Here they are earlier today.
And so this issue is largely moot. It's clear the action on this legislation is now just for show here.
And you don't need legislation.
It does mean that we don't need legislation.
Will the president veto that legislation? Or?
Again, I don't think, first of all, the legislation is not necessary. Our view has been that this piecemeal funding is, again, a gimmick.
And yet they did it. The Senate passed it, and the president signed it about half an hour ago. Your thoughts?
Again, Megan, think about this. Somebody in the Department of Defense looked at somebody else in the eye, and probably Secretary Hagel or somebody right under him, and said, do not pay these military families. Do not do it. I don't care if we could do it. Do not do it. And by doing that, they abdicated their authority and their ability and responsibility to be in that position that they were supposed to serve in. They just gave that up. I don't want them there anymore. I want them gone. And I would put somebody like Jim Mattis, the old commandant, or an old general in the Marine Corps who retired. They need somebody like him in DOD to be doing this stuff, because you need someone there who looks out for the best interest of the military and their families. And right now, obviously, we don't have that.
Understood. Congressman, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
We're joined now by Pete Hegseth. He's CEO of Concerned Veterans for America and an Iraq and Afghanistan war veteran. And Pete, I want to pick up where we left off with the Congressman about Hagel, because now you heard Congressman Hunter saying he should step down. Our own Bill O'Reilly called for that last night. Far from stepping down, Hagel, for the first time in his 7-month tenure as Defense Secretary, actually showed up at Dover Air Force Base to greet the bodies of the fallen, the very bodies, the service personnel to whom he was denying, his Pentagon was denying death benefits. Here he is on Tuesday. He'd never been, Pete. He'd never been.
When your back's against the wall, Megan, when your back's against the wall, you do whatever you can to fix the problem. Notice who's leading this charge. Congressman Duncan Hunter, Iraq and Afghanistan vet. Mike Kaufman in the hearing, Iraq vet. These are guys that understand the central aspect of this sacred trust. That all you want is a commander-in-chief at the end of the day that will give you what you need to succeed on the battlefield and ensure if you give your life on the altar of freedom, your family will be taken care of. And the fact that President Obama and Chuck Hagel didn't do everything in their power, everything, and it could have been a stroke of a pen, a piece of legislation. This administration has been the king of executive orders. Anything they wanted to do, they could have done it, and it's precisely because of what Congressman Hunter said. Veterans and military families from the beginning of this shutdown have been political pawns, from the World War II memorial blocking veterans, from the VA benefits and talking about how horrible it's going to be for veterans immediately, even though there's delays on that, to this. They've been using them, and it's an absolute outrage, and we should be calling them on it.
Why? Because the politicians know that veterans touch a soft spot in the American heart.
They touch everybody. That's right. And the president believes that by turning up the heat on this shutdown, he can turn and point a finger at Republicans. So there's a political win for him to turn the heat up on veterans and military families. Someone made that call to not give benefits to military families because someone, probably in the political side, who hasn't served, thought, you know what, that'll turn it up even more.
Because we were told, we confirmed today that the Department of Defense went to the Department of Justice late last week, and said, we don't think that we can provide these benefits. What do you think? And the DOJ said, no, you can't do it. And so the question is, then why didn't somebody go to Barack Obama? Why didn't somebody go to Congress and say, we need this fixed and we need it fixed now? It wasn't until Tuesday, when this hit the press big time, that people started to talk about it. And now suddenly, now here we are Thursday night, a week later, finally we have an order.
It's because someone's heart was in the absolute wrong place. And this is, if we're putting military families, war widows, in the crosshairs of a political shutdown, then someone should be stepping down and someone should be fired. Because anyone who looks at this country and understands what it represents and what it means to sacrifice sees this as the very least the baseline of what we do for our families. So strip that out of it. You want to fight about a budget, you want to fight about a debt ceiling, you want to talk about debt reduction, deficit reduction. These are important issues. But leave vets and war widows and military families out of it, and that's an important statement to make.
Some things are inviolate, and you guys go out there in the battlefield to protect us. You risk your lives to protect us and our freedom and our values. Who's protecting you? Who has your back?
That's right. This is not equal opportunity outrage. This is a commander-in-chief, a leader who should be looking for our backs at every moment and didn't hear and needs to be called to the carpet.
Pete, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Megan.
Thanks for your service as well.